They called her just the lunch lady. Every morning at 6 a.m., she slipped through the side entrance of the mathematics building, apron folded over one arm, keys clinking faintly in her coat pocket. By the time students wandered in for their first lectures, the smell of eggs and toasted bread already lingered in the halls. No one asked her name. They smiled with tight lips, mumbled a thank you, and walked away mid-sentence while she handed them plates. She didn't take it personally. She never had. That's how it worked in places like this. Minds raced with theorems, and theorems didn't need names like Gloria. Still, she watched them. With a softness they couldn't recognize, she paid attention. The frantic scrawling of chalk during lunchtime debates, the cocky confidence of boys who knew no one would question their answers, the quiet panic in the eyes of a young girl whose calculator always froze during presentations. And then there were the jokes. "She probably thinks pie is a dessert," one of the grad students snickered. They all laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, the kind of laughter that's meant to land just below the ribs, so you can't call it out, but you still feel it for days. Gloria didn't flinch. She wiped the counter, placed down another tray, and whispered something under her breath. The joke teller didn't hear her, but the janitor passing by did. He paused just long enough to glance at her hands. They were stained with chalk. Not grease. Chalk. Before we go on, if stories like this stir something in you, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? I want to know where my people are listening from, all around the world. Now, back to Gloria. She had seen that equation before. Not the same symbols, not exactly, but the structure, the intent behind it. It was posted on the hallway chalkboard, unsolved, unproven, and surrounded by students with furrowed brows and shattered confidence. She stopped in front of it one afternoon, tray in hand. The noise of the cafeteria faded behind her. She stared for a long time. A professor passed by and raised an eyebrow, amused. "Don't worry, Miss Gloria," he said. "It's nothing you need to trouble yourself with." She didn't respond. Her fingers traced an invisible path along the board. And just as she turned to walk away, she whispered 3 numbers. 3 numbers that would haunt every mind in that building for the rest of the semester. If you've ever been underestimated, laughed at, or made to feel invisible, this story is for you. Drop your country in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and let me know if you've ever had a Gloria moment, where the world didn't see you coming. And if you're ready to hear the rest of her story, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep going. She still kept her old notebooks, tucked in a faded biscuit tin beneath the sink, between worn dish towels and unopened mail. The pages had yellowed, corners bent like they'd bowed under time. But the ink? The ink refused to fade. Equations scrawled in looping strokes, side notes in tiny print. Even now, her handwriting looked like someone rushing to outpace the world. Late that night, Gloria sat at her kitchen table in her modest apartment, no TV on, just the hum of the fridge and the tap of her pencil. One light bulb buzzed above her head as she rewrote the equation she'd seen on the board earlier. The one they all had wrestled with. She didn't need Google, didn't need a textbook. She'd solved the bones of that problem 30 years ago. On a back porch in Alabama, with chalk and a borrowed geometry book from the public library. But life had taken a turn. She remembered the moment like it had split her life into 2 halves. A letter of admission to a prestigious technical college, folded carefully, even kissed once. And then the phone call. Her father's accident, her mother's silence. The siblings are too young to understand why their oldest sister is no longer packed for school, but for a job at the cafeteria. She never resented them, not once. She just buried the part of herself that solved for X in her sleep. Now, at 63, she let that part stretch again. She scribbled notes and crossed them out. The symbols felt familiar, like old friends who'd moved away but hadn't changed their numbers. A knock at her door startled her. It was Mia, the girl from upstairs. 11, curious, full of questions. "You left your porch light on," she said. "My mom said to check if you were okay." Gloria smiled and waved her in. "I'm just working on something." Mia's eyes widened when she looked at the table. "Is this schoolwork?" "Sort of," Gloria said softly. "You a teacher?" A pause. Then, "No, baby, I just like numbers." Mia looked again. That's the same squiggly stuff the college boys always talk about. They say it's impossible. Gloria chuckled under her breath, handing Mia a cookie from the tin. Then they ain't been hungry enough yet. As Mia left, she turned around and asked, "Can I be like you when I grow up?" Gloria didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to the page. "Don't be like me," she finally said. "Be louder." Back at the university, the professors had no idea what Storm was quietly building. Equations they thought were unsolvable were just unfinished sentences to someone who'd never been allowed to speak. And Gloria? She was just getting started. On campus, they never noticed her shoes. Always clean, always polished, as though some part of her still believed respect could be earned in small ways. The professors floated past her like clouds, lost in thought or too busy to greet her with more than a nod. Students dropped trays at her counter without eye contact. But someone had noticed. Mr. Ray, the building's night janitor, had worked at the university for 2 decades. He never wore the branded shirt they gave him, said it felt more like a uniform than a job. His knees cracked when he bent, but his eyes missed nothing. He'd seen her, scribbling in a dollar store notebook on her break, whispering numbers to herself while wiping tables, taking out trash and solving variables in the same breath. That morning, Ray stopped beside her as she filled the coffee dispensers. "You still playing with those puzzles?" he asked casually. She didn't look up. "They're not puzzles." Ray nodded. "You ever gonna show one of them folks upstairs?" Gloria gave a tired smile. "They'd rather believe I'm stealing salt packets than solving anything." Ray leaned closer. "Still, you got something in your head, Gloria. Don't let this place convince you otherwise." But this place had its ways. At lunchtime, a group of seniors gathered near the department's whiteboard. A visiting scholar had arrived, some mathematical hotshot from Berlin, and left behind a challenge on the board. A string of symbols that wrapped like ivy across the surface. Whoever solved it would earn an invite to the prestigious Grant Herschel Symposium in London. Full scholarship, public acclaim. Gloria stood by the coffee cart, pouring cream into tiny cups when she heard them talk. "This one's gonna end a few careers," one student laughed. "Professor Lim's already on his 3rd attempt. He's pulling his hair out. Looks like scribbles to me." Then a voice pierced through. "Maybe we should ask the lunch lady. She might know." Laughter. Loud this time. She didn't flinch. She stirred the coffee, tapped the spoon twice on the side, and walked away. But later, when the hall quieted and the echo of ambition faded into silence, she returned. Alone. She faced the board, her apron still tied at her waist, her palms slightly flour-dusted from biscuit prep. This time, she didn't just stare. She pulled a pen from her pocket and jotted something into her palm. Behind her, 2 grad students walked by. One glanced over and whispered to the other, "She actually thinks she can read that?" The other laughed. "Please, she probably thinks Lambda is a cleaning product." They disappeared around the corner. Gloria stood still, not angry, not embarrassed, just steady. In her world, silence had never meant absence. It meant calculation. And while the others were racing for glory, she was taking measurements, watching, listening, solving. Not for a prize, not for attention, for herself. For every girl who was told brilliance only came in the form of pale skin, pressed suits, and framed diplomas. They called it the firewall conjecture. Not because it burned, but because every mind that touched it eventually gave up, walked away, and never returned. It had stumped theorists for 3 decades. It lived on whiteboards like a ghost, always there, always mocking. Dr. Klaus Richter, the German scholar who posted the problem, didn't expect a solution. That was the whole point. It was an invitation to war, intellectual war. And at a place like Harlan University, that challenge was bait too tempting to ignore. Faculty hovered over the board between lectures, fingers smudging chalk, voices low and tense. Graduate students formed alliances like soldiers in the trenches, comparing partial results in whispered tones, hoping for a breakthrough that never came. The prize wasn't just prestige. It was leverage. Whoever solved it would secure funding, gain access to the London Symposium, and earn a 6-figure speaking contract overnight. But the equation sat untouched at its core. A coiled viper, no one dared press too hard. Gloria stood outside the lecture hall one evening, mopping the tiled floor. The doors were left slightly ajar, and inside she could hear Professor Lim's voice cracking with frustration. No, no, no. The expansion collapses in the fourth iteration. A textbook slammed shut. Gloria didn't peek in. She'd heard that voice before. That tone. It was the same sound her high school math teacher made when she corrected him in front of the class. Back then, she was 15 and confident, pencil in hand, correction in mouth. He called her disruptive. The principal called her parents. The scholarship committee never called at all. That memory surfaced now as she leaned against her mop handle and listened. The math hadn't changed. Only the room had. Only the people allowed to speak had changed. Later that night, she returned to the board. The halls were quiet. She brought no notebook this time, just memory. Just years of silent work, patterns stored deep inside her, learned from textbooks long out of print and libraries that had since closed. She traced part of the conjecture with her fingertip. It curved, dipped, rose again, like gospel music on paper. Then she paused. There was a small error. Not in the problem itself, but in the way it had been translated. The formatting of the initial matrix was incorrect. Subtle, almost invisible unless you'd seen it done by hand. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her coat, not to copy the solution. She wasn't there yet, just to mark the first place they'd all gone wrong. Down the hall, Mr. Ray watched quietly, arms crossed. Somebody's about to get a lesson they never saw coming, he muttered to himself. But Gloria didn't do it for revenge. She did it because some truths demanded to be solved, even if the world laughed when you picked up the chalk. It was almost midnight. The lights in Gloria's apartment flickered once, then steadied. She sat at the kitchen table again, the same spot where rent checks were written and grocery lists scribbled on scrap paper. But tonight, none of that mattered. Her notebook lay open in front of her. The pages lined with numbers, diagrams, and annotations so intricate they could have come from a PhD dissertation. Her hands moved fast. Not rushed, just ready. Like the numbers had waited long enough. Each calculation carried weight, not just intellectual weight, but memory. Every formula she wrote down had once been interrupted by a baby's cry. Every diagram had once been sketched in her head while flipping pancakes in a diner 2 towns over. Every margin note had been squeezed into the back of a utility bill envelope because she couldn't afford proper paper. People thought brilliance was loud. But Gloria's kind had always been quiet. When her father died, she didn't just lose a parent. She lost her chance. The money set aside for her scholarship was swallowed by funeral costs. Her mother, once proud of her brainy girl, folded under grief. Her siblings needed breakfast before they needed babysitters. So Gloria traded books for hairnets, and never complained. Not because she lacked ambition, but because ambition, in her world, didn't buy diapers. She watched from the sidelines as others rose, especially those who stumbled through problems she could solve in her head. She saw white boys with barely passing grades get internships through family connections. She watched young women with French-sounding last names breeze through presentations with borrowed brilliance. And still, she stayed. Now, years later, she was facing an equation that had defeated everyone, and her pencil didn't hesitate once. Halfway through her process, a knock came at her door. This time, it wasn't Mia. It was her landlord. "You're behind," he muttered, waving a pink slip. "I know," she said calmly, "but I'll have it by Friday," he grunted. "Just don't make me chase you again." She closed the door, sat back down. "Friday," she whispered to herself. "That gives me 4 more nights." Because deep down she knew, solving this wouldn't just silence the laughter. It might change her life. It might buy her freedom. Not the kind printed on banknotes, but the kind written in self-worth. The next morning, she returned to the cafeteria with dark circles under her eyes and a new calm in her step. She served eggs. She handed out coffee. She smiled at the same professors who still didn't know her last name. But in her pocket, folded neatly between a napkin and a receipt, was a partial solution. And if anyone had looked close enough, they would have seen her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From restraint. It happened because of a napkin. A napkin. Gloria had been reviewing the final stretch of the equation during her break, pencil gripped between flour-dusted fingers, sketching out a substitution method most of the department had already dismissed as impractical. But she saw something they didn't. A rhythm. The final variable clicked into place just as the clock above the counter buzzed, signaling lunch hour. She folded her work quickly, slid it between two stacked trays, but a single napkin page drifted to the floor. She never noticed, but Daniel Mason did. Daniel was a second-year grad student, white, brilliant in theory, but untested in patience. His thesis advisor had given him one instruction that week: don't embarrass yourself in front of Dr. Richter. So when he picked up the napkin, ready to trash it, and saw what was on it, he stopped breathing for a second. These weren't cafeteria notes. These were high-order transforms, complex, elegant, annotated in a looping feminine hand that corrected a flaw he'd spent 19 hours struggling to reconcile. He scanned it again. The substitution was unconventional, risky, but it worked. It worked. He took the napkin straight to Professor Lim. 10 minutes later, 4 senior faculty huddled in a small office, jaws tight, faces pale. This is real," Lim whispered, voice dry. "Who wrote this?" Daniel hesitated. "I found it in the cafeteria." "Who in the cafeteria?" I think the lunch lady dropped it." A beat of silence, then laughter, tight, awkward, dismissive. Lim shook his head. "Get serious." "I am serious," Daniel said. "It matches the same style as the notebook I saw her writing in last week during her break." "You mean to tell me the woman who scrapes trays might have just solved the firewall conjecture?" Another professor scoffed. "Don't waste our time." Daniel stood firm. "Run the numbers. They hold." And they did. By the end of the day, Gloria's note had been transcribed, projected, and dissected across 3 internal faculty meetings. Her identity hadn't been confirmed, but whispers moved quickly. The janitor saw her scribbling again. A teaching assistant mentioned overhearing her mutter sequences under her breath while stirring soup. By evening, the math department buzzed with a question that no one wanted to say out loud. Could it really be her? The woman whose name no one remembered, except on payroll slips. The woman whose ID badge read staff, cafeteria. But still, no one asked her directly. Not yet. Instead, they did what people do when a truth frightens them. They speculated. They doubted. They were delayed. And Gloria? She stood behind her counter the next day, apron neatly ironed, eyes calm. Watching, listening, knowing exactly what they had in their hands and exactly who it came from. Not a mistake. Not a fluke. And certainly not their idea. The summons came disguised as a polite request. "Could you step into the faculty office for a moment?" the assistant asked, eyes avoiding hers. Gloria didn't blink. She untied her apron, smoothed her blouse, and followed without a word. The air in the corridor changed as she passed. Conversations paused mid-sentence, gazes lowered like curtains being drawn. The office was cold and overlit, as though the brightness could hide the discomfort in the room. 4 professors sat in a semicircle, folders open, the napkin note enlarged on the projector behind them. She stood. No chair offered. "Miss Gloria," began Professor Lim, clearing his throat, "we've come across some rather advanced calculations." "I know," she said softly. "You know?" Her eyes met his. "Yes." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in the corner. No one had told him she'd actually be brought in. "We'd like to understand," another professor said, adjusting his tie. "Where did you learn this? This level of mathematics?" "I taught myself," she answered plainly. "That's impossible," someone blurted. "No, sir," she said, voice steady. "What's impossible is doing it while raising 4 children, working 3 jobs, and being told my kind doesn't belong in rooms like this." The silence cracked. "Do you understand the implications of what you wrote?" Lim asked. "Yes, it's correct. But this structure, this inversion matrix, it's not from any published methodology." She shrugged. "Neither were the rules that kept me out of college. I learned to build my own." Daniel stepped forward. "She's the one. I found the napkin. I followed the math. It's real." The room turned toward him. "Then explain this," another professor snapped, pointing. "You're telling me a woman without formal training just walked into a century-old problem and solved it," Gloria finished. No theatrics, no pride, just a statement of fact. One of the younger faculty looked up slowly. "Did you really do this?" She nodded once. "In my spare time, after shifts, between dinner and dishes." They didn't clap, they didn't praise, they looked panicked. Because it wasn't just that she had solved something they couldn't, it was who had solved it. A black woman, a cafeteria worker, someone they dismissed, ignored, laughed at. And now, that woman stood in front of them, not asking for validation, just acknowledgement. Professor Lim cleared his throat again. "We'll need to verify the full sequence. perhaps have it peer-reviewed. You do that, Gloria said. She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. Oh, and Professor, she added, next time you assign problem sets, make sure the variable isn't dignity. Some of us solved that one a long time ago. And with that, she walked out, leaving behind a room full of men suddenly unsure of their titles. The first article mispronounced her name. Glory Johnson, it read, printed beneath a grainy photo of her wiping down a lunch counter. The headline screamed, Mystery Lunch Lady Solves Elite Math Problem, Shocks Ivy League Minds. She read it in silence, paper folded neatly on the kitchen table beside her coffee. They still didn't see her. They saw the headline. They saw the clickbait. But they didn't see her. Within days, reporters started showing up outside the university. Professors scrambled to issue statements, trying to soften the blow of their failure. Suddenly, Gloria was being called remarkable, gifted, humble. But where were those words when they laughed at her tray-wiping hands? Where were they when she asked a question and was ignored? The university sent a formal letter inviting her to be honored at a faculty luncheon. They offered her a certificate, a bouquet, a chance to share her inspiring journey. She declined. Then came the scholarship groups, STEM nonprofits, news stations. They all wanted her in front of a camera, sitting politely, answering questions that made her brilliance digestible. Was it a fluke? What was your method? Did someone help you? One anchor leaned in and asked, how does it feel to go from cafeteria to calculus? Gloria tilted her head. I never left calculus, you just never looked past the cafeteria. It wasn't pride, it was protection. They wanted a headline. She had lived a lifetime, and still, the invitations kept coming. The university's president reached out, offering to name a lecture hall in her honor. Why now? She asked. He stammered. Well, we believe in highlighting voices from every walk of life. She cut in, calm as ever. No, you believe in damage control. He offered her a guest lecturer role, paid, flexible hours, no degree required. Just tell your story, he smiled. Gloria looked around the room, all white faces, all polished shoes. No, she said gently. I won't dance for your redemption. Instead, she requested access to the math lab after hours. A stack of textbooks, a laptop, and one more thing. Give that full scholarship to a black girl who didn't make it past your admissions filter, and let her skip the cafeteria job. They hesitated, but they agreed, because now the world was watching. That evening she walked back through the halls, not as staff, not as a curiosity, but as someone they couldn't ignore. The chalkboard where they once laughed was still marked with her equations. No one dared erase it. Mr. Ray passed her in the hallway and grinned. They finally see you, he said. Gloria smiled back, slow and quiet. No, she said. They see their mistake. I've always seen me. She didn't want their spotlight. She wanted access. While the media chased new angles and faculty scrambled to reframe the narrative, Gloria was back in the math lab, this time with her own tea. No janitor's knock, no watching the clock, no permission slips. She moved through equations the way others moved through prayer. But this time, she wasn't working for herself. She began compiling materials, old textbooks, revised methods, translated concepts for high schoolers locked out of elite learning. She knew who the gatekeepers were. She used to mop their floors. One afternoon, she met with the university's equity office. I'd like to start a pilot, she said, sliding over a handwritten proposal. Free weekend sessions, advanced math for girls who don't fit your checklist. They blinked at her. You mean for black students? I mean for black girls, specifically. A pause. Well, there are systems. There were systems, she said, firm. That's why I never got in. I'm not asking. I'm doing it. You can either help or step aside. They helped, quietly, reluctantly, but they knew better now. The first Saturday, 3 girls showed up, nervous, unsure, clutching notebooks too clean, pencils barely used. Gloria welcomed them into a lab she once wasn't allowed to enter. She didn't start with formulas. She started with stories about long division under flickering lights, about using junk mail envelopes as scratch paper, about teaching herself to solve problems while the world only saw her serving food. Then she opened her notebook, the same one written in the dark behind a cafeteria door when no one was watching, and she told them, your mind is a weapon, and your silence is not the price of entry. They listened, eyes wide, hands writing faster. One girl asked, are we really allowed to use the whiteboard? Gloria smiled. It's not theirs, it's yours. Word spread. By month's end, the sessions doubled, then tripled. She wasn't just rewriting numbers, she was rewriting futures. Meanwhile, the math department tried to save face. They invited her to panel discussions, awards dinners, and faculty meetings. She attended some, not for them, but to be seen by the girls, to let them know it could be done, without asking for a seat at the table built to exclude them. One professor cornered her after a talk. "Don't you think you're making this about race too much?" She looked at him calmly. "I didn't bring race into this. You did when you decided what brilliance should look like and what it shouldn't." He said nothing more. By the end of the semester, one of Gloria's students had placed top 3 in a regional calculus competition. She ran into Gloria outside the lab and hugged her tight. "They said I wasn't their kind of smart." Gloria whispered, "They were right. You're more." And as she walked home that evening, wind soft against her face, she realized something. She hadn't just solved an equation. She had solved the lie that said she couldn't. They offered her awards. She built a classroom. They tried to rewrite the story. She wrote her own ending. 6 months later, the chalkboard in Harlan University's math wing was no longer a symbol of conquest. It was a tribute, not to the faculty, not to the donors, to Gloria. Not Miss Gloria the lunch lady, but Gloria Jenkins, the woman who solved what they said was impossible. Still, she never called herself a genius, never used the word breakthrough. To her, it was just a correction, not a number, of a history. One afternoon, while packing up from her last Saturday class of the term, she noticed something in the corner of the board. A tiny note scribbled by one of the girls. It said, "Thank you for showing me I was never the problem, just unseen." Gloria stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up the eraser. But she didn't wipe it off. Some things deserve to stay. On her way out, she passed by a group of students arguing over a new theorem. One turned to her and said, without hesitation, "Professor Jenkins, what's your take?" She paused, not because she didn't know, but because she wanted to feel it. That moment, the world finally asked her to speak. Not serve. She answered the question, of course. Gently, thoughtfully. Then I walked out into the open air. The wind felt different now. Not softer, not warmer, just freer. Because she wasn't carrying the weight of proving herself anymore. She had nothing left to prove, and everything left to give. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've ever had your talent overlooked because of your skin, your job title, your silence, let this story remind you, there is no equation you can't solve, especially the one they swore you never would. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever been dismissed, only to come back stronger? Share it. We want to hear your voice. We're building something powerful here on Echoes of Hope, one story at a time. Like, share, and subscribe. Not for us, but for every Gloria out there still waiting to be seen. Because brilliance doesn't always wear a name tag. Sometimes it wears an apron.